We started out building a map sting, just my brother and I, on a shoestring budget. We had no money, but we kept working on it. And honestly, I often talk about not giving up.
Yes.
But the truth is, at this moment, when no one was interested, the only reason we didn't give up is that no one was hiring.
And then it crushes you completely because you are then left with very limited options. Either you sell to Google or you work for Google.
It's an intense roller coaster. I was so deep in the dungeons. Actually, I called my mom in tears and this happened. And my mom said, son, it's because there's something better waiting for you. Mad. I call it heightened motivation. Completely out of options, having just met the biggest star in Silicon Valley and completely broke. Yes. So look, I came here 4 years ago, as you know, married to a Greek goddess. We're investing together, by the way. It's very much, speaking of married couples working together. Obviously. And she said, you must be thinking about Panathēnea. And I never heard of Panathēnea, I have to admit. But it turns out Panathēnea, so the Olympic Games every 4 years back then. And in between was Panathēnea, just as popular. The purpose here is we come together and we may talk, we may compete, but the purpose is to improve the future. The top researchers in the top labs tell me that in 1 to 3 years, knowledge workers will no longer add value to the world. There's nothing a knowledge worker like me can do that can't be done by AI 3 years out. the whole movement like this. And the discussions afterwards were mostly about whether this was true or not.
Hello everyone and welcome to a special episode of the Recursive podcast. Today we're sitting down with a true pioneer of the digital age, Lars Rasmussen, against the stunning backdrop of Athens at the foot of the Acropolis. From co-founding Google Maps and revolutionizing the way we navigate the world, to reimagining online communication with Google Wave and leading engineering teams at Facebook, Lars' journey is a testament to the power of innovation and grit. Beyond his groundbreaking work in technology, he now dedicates his time to angel investing, kite surfing, and curating Panathēnea, an innovation festival that bridges ancient traditions with modern advancements. In our conversation, Lars walks us through the beginning of his career during the dot-com boom years in Silicon Valley, the highs and lows of entrepreneurship, and the pivotal moments that led to the creation of Google Maps. We dive deep into the art of perseverance, the serendipitous turns that shaped his career, and the lessons he is applying today in his investments. Whether you're an inspiring entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or simply curious about the stories behind game-changing innovations, this episode offers an inspiring glimpse into the mind of a visionary who not only helped shape the digital world, but is now actively contributing to the growth of the innovation ecosystems in Greece and Central and Eastern Europe. Lars, welcome to the Recursive podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I believe we met a couple of years ago. And already back then, I've been really excited to have you here in our podcast.
Finally,
to
it's
talk
happening.
To you a bit more about the story behind the story, because there has been a lot published about you. It is a journey which is marked with a lot of successes, a lot of also ups and downs.
Yep.
It is a true story of resilience, and you have been part of this big trends and events that we have been only watching from a bit far here in Central and Eastern Europe. You were at the epicenter. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation and thank you for taking the time to sit here with me during the Doers Festival in Athens.
Of course.
Now, I'll bring you back in time. I want us to start from the beginning. And the first thing that I noticed when I was doing research on your journey, on your biography, was that you graduated with a PhD from Berkeley.
That's right.
Theoretical computer science.
Yes.
Did you intend ever to have an academic career, or was it clear already back then that you would be an entrepreneur?
No, look, I was headed in that direction, but I graduated in the late 90s in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. At the height of the original dot-com boom.
Yes.
And a lot of academics were leaving academia, starting companies. Some of them went really big, like Yahoo was started this way. Of course, Google, Akamai was a big thing back then. They're still around. But so there was a professor down the hall from me, right as I graduated. He left to start a company called Digital Fountain. Mike Luby is his name.
Wow.
Good friend.
Yes.
Still. And he had this amazing technology. I mean, really, really deep, a deep algorithm in a field of forward error correction, where instead of resending package that goes lost in a network, you can encode the data beforehand and just send a bunch of it. And as long as enough packets arrive, doesn't matter which packets arrive, you can reconstruct the original file. So this is called forward error correction. And it's an old field, deep field of research. And Mike had invented a new algorithm that beat everything else, and not by a small margin. I mean, it was truly the best in the field thought this was not even possible. And then we left. He left to start this company. I was just graduating, so he grabbed me. I had some programming experience from my undergraduate years. I made my pocket money, funded my studies by programming actually in graphics design, which we'll come back to, I'm sure.
Yes.
And so he hired me. I was his first engineer. We built this company. And the next 5 years, we raised $42 million.
Amazing.
And never really figured out how to turn Mike's amazing technology into a viable product.
So that was the dot-com bubble.
And then the bubble burst. Wasn't
Yes.
our fault. The bubble burst all on its own, right? And all that money completely dried up. But then by then I was kind of hooked on entrepreneurship. But there was a clear path from academia to trying to commercialize this really deep theoretical algorithm that Mike had made. And then I was hooked on it. And the bubble burst and the company almost died. It didn't actually die, got sold to Qualcomm. And the technology is now everywhere. I mean, every time you make a phone call, Mike's codes are involved because Qualcomm, the big mobile chip manufacturer, bought the technology. And then we got laid off because the company was running out of money. And my brother and I, my older brother and I, we both worked there.
Jens.
Jens, that's right. And we got laid off. He actually got laid off in a round before me. He's the smarter of us. And so when I got laid off, he called me up and he's like, Lars, we should work on maps. Because he's a college dropout. He's incredibly visionary mind. He has like a new startup idea every week. Or maybe he only tells me about one every week, and he doesn't even bother telling me about the other 10 he has every week.
Okay.
But he had dusted off a bunch of ideas, and he'd found one that was still relevant. It was actually a few years old, but also one where a small team could have a big impact, because it was clear that there wasn't like a lot of money to be raised at that time. Everyone was getting laid off. All investors had lost all their money. And so he picked mapping. And at the time, so in the US, there was MapQuest, had been the first mover, had made a big splash, the first to put maps online, had sold itself for more than $1 billion to AOL, which was still a big player back then. And then Microsoft and Yahoo had built really copycat map sites, and those three kind of ruled.
Quite the competition
mapping.
you had at this point.
Well, but you know what happened was that because when AOL bought MapQuest, they had not found a way to make the money back. Like, they bought it for more than $1 billion, but they never found a way to monetize it. And then the team kind of got laid off, or they left in frustration. And then Yahoo and Microsoft made mapping sites that also weren't particularly making money. And so one thing that actually played in our favor was that almost all of the ideas, when we showed our ideas to people that had worked in maps before, they all were like, no one will care. No one will care. It's a great idea.
Probably also reacted in a similar way. Yeah.
Not quite. I mean, VCs were just like not investing, right? Because of that bubble had just burst. More dramatic than the recent interest rate driven downturn. Like the NASDAQ lost 80% of its value in 2 years. And it took 12 years for it to recover that loss. So it was quite a crisis, very much centered on tech and these out of proportion expectations, although it did happen. Google came out of that era, of course, and Apple had been started. Anyway, so we started out building a map sting, just my brother and I, on a shoestring budget. We had no money. We were all going to be rich in the dot-com bubble, right? So we hadn't saved up a penny. And so I moved into a room in a shared house with a bunch of people in Berkeley, and Jens moved back in with mom in Denmark. He hates this part of the story, but it's true. And then we were working on this thing for maybe 6 months. And we found this guy who had been on the board of the startup that laid us off. Okay. He was on a panel in Silicon Valley talking about how terrible things were in Silicon Valley. And we couldn't afford a ticket, so we kind of crashed the party. I went up to him afterwards, hey, remember us? And he did. And then we showed him this thing, and he thought it was cool, so he introduced us to some VCs, but there was just like no traction. You know, we're unknown, our prototype was in this space, and no one really thought could make money. But we kept working on it. And honestly, I often talk about not giving up.
Yes.
But the truth is, at this moment, when no one was interested, the only reason we didn't give up is that no one was hiring either.
So you had no
So
alternative.
we might as well, you know, because everyone was laying off people back then. And so we kept working, and then eventually it got good. We added 2 friends from Australia, and actually flew to Australia on the cheapest tickets we could find, so we could all 4 be together in Australia for maybe 6 months. Great coffee in Australia. Fantastic city, Sydney, you know, as beautiful as Athens. And we worked some more there, and the crisis mentality waned a little bit, and then I went back to California, tried with the VCs again, and now we're actually got a little bit of traction with one of the big players in Sand Hill Road, like an old-time VC. They're still around, still one of the biggest in the world, and they had helped fund Google and Apple and Yahoo and some of the biggest successes, and they got interested. And we got far enough into the process that we started talking numbers. They suggested $2 million for 40% of the company, which by today's standards,
Wow.
terrible deal.
Yes.
But in 2002,
that was different.
we were like in 7th heaven. I mean, because they were a big player and no one else was investing, and this was gonna completely make us. Unfortunately, we got only to the 70% level in their funnel. Like you start out being 1 in 10,000, and then we got down to be 7 in 10. And we kept asking them, what's our chance of an investment at this stage in your funnel? And they had very precise answers. And then we got to the 70%, which is when you sign a term sheet with these guys, you have only a 70% chance of an investment, which surprised me. I was very young. I thought it would be higher, but they said, yeah, look, what happens is we do due diligence. And in 1 out of 10 cases on average, we uncover something where the entrepreneur may have misrepresented or exaggerated something. And then the deal's off. And this I knew would not happen, of course, right? So in my head, now we're at 80%. But then they explained that in the 20% of cases, during due diligence, they go and talk to all of their existing portfolio companies to see if any of them are rumbling in your space, and particularly the more mature members of their portfolio. And if so, they sometimes don't invest, both because this particular firm doesn't like to have competing companies in their portfolio, but also if it's a really big company, your window might close sooner than you think, because you don't know what's going on there, right? And that's actually what happened. Because Yahoo, it turned out, and I actually didn't have to go talk to them. Yahoo had the nerve, I mean, they couldn't know, but like they launched a little change to the map site the day before we were scheduled to go sign the term sheet.
The day before?
Literally the day before. And it was nothing like what we were proposing, but they hadn't touched that site for 4 years. And we thought, no one is even touching maps right now. So we have the window. And then they made a change. And then, so this particular VC had 12 partners back then, and they only made consensus decisions. So we're famous for this. Right? And so there was one skeptic on the team of 12 partners. And when this person, we never found out who it was, of course, when this person saw what Yahoo had done, he was like, no, deal's off. And then the deal's off. And that was quite painful, as you can imagine. But it ended up super well, because then instead of investing, the VC actually threw an external party. Ram Shriram is his name, amazing guy, and he calls himself a Sherpa that helps entrepreneurs scale the mountains. And the VC had introduced us to Ram, who was going to be on a board, he was going to help us with business development, because we were all engineers.
And he was an early stage investor of Google,
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Wow. Exactly. Early stage investor, and he had been the Sherpa for Larry and Sergey when they were not quite at our stage, but when they were first starting to raise VC money. And he had liked our maps. When the VC decided not to invest, he said, look, I can't work with you if they're not going to invest, but And then the most impactful bit of business advice I've ever received, he said the exact same reason that the VC doesn't want to invest is going to make Google want to buy you. Because they also saw that Yahoo was getting interested in mapping again, and Google has nothing in maps. If they buy you and you combine your great ideas with Google's amazing team and resources, Google gets to leapfrog Yahoo. And they love leapfrogging Yahoo, said Ram.
Weren't you afraid that instead of that, the thing is going to die because, I don't know, a culture clash somehow?
I was actually afraid of that.
Did you have this line of thinking?
But Ram, I think he had this kind of conversation. We were a 4-person team. We had never raised a cent, never paid ourselves a salary, and we were about to go join Google, huge company of 2,000 people. They have like 200,000 now, but they were a monster, a gorilla, right? We were also big fans, though, I should say.
Yeah.
And in fact, the only thing that might have gotten us to not continue back when things were not moving would have been a job at Google, because we're actually still hiring. We had that conversation because we're such big fans of Google. Mm-hmm. This was in maybe 2002 or 3. I think we're in 2003 now. And then we talked to Ram about this. And he said, look, I know this is not what you want. He didn't say it out loud, but we knew that this was also our last option. There was nothing else we could do.
Especially when we see draws back, a term sheet, and I
I should just say that they didn't. Yes, we hadn't signed it, and it was completely in. And in fact, I love this particular VC. If I ever have a chance to work with them, either one of my portfolio companies or if I ever go out myself, they would be the first I will go to. They're amazing, and. But we had made this thing very consciously. They were the only ones interested. And we got a lawyer who was willing to work on contingency. We only had to pay this guy if we raised the money. And we asked him, hey, how do you negotiate a better deal than $2 million for 40% of the company? He said, well, there's exactly one way to do that. You get someone else interested. And he said, there is a thing you can do, think about it, which is you can let me spread the rumor that this particular VC wants to invest, because it was such a big deal that others would want to just be part of it, just because that VC was so good. And
so he knew how to leak the information in the right channels.
Yeah.
Okay.
And lawyers know this, right? Because they know everyone. And then we're like, well, that's, we felt that was just a little too aggressive. And so we went and asked the VC, the partner there. We're like, hey, so our lawyer says we should go spread the rumor that you guys are interested, because then others will come to the table and then maybe we can get a better valuation from you. What do you think?
Of course, you're welcome.
Well, he did actually. He laughed that we were telling him. Yeah. And he said, look, we're cool with that. And we know it works. We call it the blessing of us, right? Okay. So people will come and they will want to because we're so successful. But he said, we haven't invested yet. And you're only at, at the time we were like at 60%, right? And if we decide not to, which we may, you will find it really hard to explain to everyone else why they should when we're not going to. Right? So it's a bold card to play.
Yeah.
And so we went in with open eyes, we played the card, it worked for like a span of 1 week. We were like the hottest ticket in town. And everyone was coming at us, and suddenly we were being sold that we should let this VC or that VC invest in us. Which felt great. But it only lasted until Yahoo did that thing that made the big VC decide not to invest. And then everyone else also. And now everyone knew.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's why Google was our really, truly only option. And we were also like broke. We'd worked for a year and a half without any money coming in. We'd actually kind of done little contracting gigs, and we'd cashed out credit cards, and my brother cashed out a pension even. Did
you have interpersonal conflicts at this point also because it was so strained and it was so difficult?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit, but not so much, because my brother and I, when we talked about this, we're like, look, this obviously suck. But the fact that we got so close with one of the biggest VCs in the Valley, we must be onto something. There must be a way to turn this still into something, right? And then we went and had that conversation with Ram. Hey, they're not going to invest. What's your advice?
Yeah.
And he said, well, go sell to Google. We got some other advices that was including the partner at the big VC that was the most interested. Actually, one thing, if this might be useful, one thing I've learned many times over, when you deal with an organization, in this case a VC, you're always dealing with individuals in that organization. And the organization does not have a unified opinion about anything, right? And when there's a deal to be made, in this case, an investment, but it could be any other deal, like, a license of a festival in Texas that we'll talk about later, but you always talk to the people that want the deal to happen. Because the people that are skeptics in the organization, they don't want to invest the time in talking to you. So you always talk to the ones that are most in favor of the deal, and this gives you a very skewed impression of how close you are to making the deal. And
that's actually a great tip.
Yeah,
I mean, they are at the same time your champion. You have to equip them with the right arguments so that they can actually beat up the skeptics. But don't forget that there are others who...
Exactly. You can fall into this trap. We're almost there. We almost have this deal, because that is the impression that you will get from your champion. But you have to constantly imagine that there is a skeptical camp in the organization that you will not get access to. Right? So you need your champion to go talk to them.
Can I also ask you maybe something a bit more personal? How does it affect ego when you're, the hottest startup for a while, and then it crushes you completely because you are then left with very limited options? Either you sell to Google or you work for Google.
It's an intense roller coaster. Emotionally, it's an intense roller coaster. Yeah. We were fairly young and unproven and broke. And we're in Silicon Valley with all these hotshots, and it's quite taxing. This thing of going from, suddenly you see the light, you see the hope, you see this big investor wanting to invest, and then it just comes crashing down. It was devastating. I mean, for 3 days, I carefully didn't drive my car for 3 days because I was so deep in the dungeons. Actually, I called my mom in tears, and this happened. And my mom said, son, it's because there's something better waiting for you.
I love it.
She thought it was a good piece of advice.
Do you believe in destiny?
Definitely.
Yeah, after this story, you have to believe in
destiny. That feels a lot like luck. And because then Ram was like, and to your point before, weren't you afraid that? On one hand, we were. On the other hand, there was no other option. So we were much more focused on, we have to make this happen. This is our last chance.
I love also this part of the story where you rewrite the whole software solution in 3 weeks from...
Yeah. So this happened. So look, you have to go back to the early noughts. So we're 2001, 2 when we wrote the software. And the web was just really becoming the thing, the platform. But it was just starting to take over from desktop apps on your laptop or your desktop computer. And my brother was in favor of desktop apps, and I was more into the web. Right? And the tension is, of course, the desktop app is much more powerful, and we were doing maps, and you need a lot of power for this. And so our first product, and the thing we pitched to the VC, was not the website that everyone came to know not long after. It was an app, a desktop app that we've written in C++ that you would install on your computer next to the web browser. But I was so in favor of the web, but the thesis of our company was the reason, we said this a million times over, the reason MapQuest, Yahoo, and Microsoft have essentially the same product is that a web browser cannot do better than this. And you have to think back then when you went on MapQuest, you would see this a page with a static image of a little section of map and a bunch of text around it. And then if you wanted to move the map, you would click a button and the whole page would reload with a new static image of the map having moved a bit. So it was really pedestrian compared to what we're used to today. And that's why we wrote this application. But because I love the web, I integrated bits of web stuff in our application. So in our, you have imagine this application sitting next to your web browser, and your Sinus map was super fast because it was native code. And then we'd have these markers, and then you click it, and then a billboard of the cinema would hover over the map. And that billboard was rendered with an embedded web browser.
Yeah.
And so we did a lot of web stuff. And I learned a lot about these new trends that were starting to happen, mostly in Internet Explorer. This was really before even Firefox had come out.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Right,
Yeah.
so Internet Explorer had kind of killed Netscape, and then some of the Netscape and Mosaic people had left. They were just starting Firefox, and it was just like in version 0.7 alpha or something. But Internet Explorer, there were some people at Microsoft starting to play around with scripting on the web, with JavaScript. And in order to support this billboard, I learned a bunch about this stuff. And then we went to Google, we showed them our C++ application, and we demoed to Larry. So Ram is a friend of Larry, right? And once we got over our fears, which took 30 seconds, because we had no other option, he put us right in front of Larry Page. And it was him and us in a room alone, and we were demoing this thing. And Larry, I don't know if you ever met him, but he's a man of very few words and even fewer facial expressions. And we were in a weird spot because we just lost the big investor, right? So we're demoing this thing, and he's basically saying nothing the whole time.
Did you still manage to read him somehow? Or
Well,
maybe
but in
Ram
the
helped
end, I
you
mean,
read
he was
him?
very clear in the end. He
Yeah.
said the following. He said, "I like the way you think about maps, but Google is really a web company. Are you sure? Are you sure you can't do better in a browser?" And then he dropped the mic and walked out the room.
Okay, that's a clear message.
Yes. And he walked out the room, and then he brought in some corp dev people. Actually, Megan Smith, do you know her? So she later became Obama's CTO at
Yes,
the
yes.
National.
Yeah.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
And so she was a corp dev person. She came in, we said, hey, blah, blah, blah. And then we went home, on one hand, starstruck, because we just met Larry Page, but also very motivated. And then this is where it then happened. In the next 3 weeks, we rewrote our entire client from C++ to JavaScript in Internet Explorer. And we disproved the very thesis that we had started out with, namely that web browsers could not do better with maps. But it turns out, if you dug out these new JavaScript-y things, you could actually build a map that moved and that zoomed, and you could put stuff on top of it. And it wasn't quite as fast as the C++ thing, but it was tons better than MapQuest and Yahoo and Microsoft's existing sites. And it didn't require any installation. Back then it was common to have to install all these nasty plugins in your browser to get any kind of interactivity, but this was all done with the native functionality of Internet Explorer. And then we picked up beta version of Firefox, unstable, whatever, and we tried running it there, and it worked.
Wow, magic. Okay.
Barely. And then we read more about Firefox, and the approach of the Firefox team was, look, we have this standard that we've all worked in the standards bodies to create, but in reality, whatever Internet Explorer does, that's the standard. And so we're just going to copy everything they do. And that's why it was starting to work in there too. And then we decided, this is it. And we went back to Google 3 weeks later and assembled a big team. Brett Taylor was leading it this time. Do you know Brett?
No.
So Brett was a very young and brilliant rising PM at Google. And he worked on this team called Local Search, which was a search page where you could go pizza in one field, and you could go San Francisco in another field, and it would show you a bunch of pizza places. And he worked on that, and they had a little MapQuest map embedded on that page. And he heard that Larry had seen this thing, and so he assembled a team of Google people to go see the next demo. And we came back in, and where before we had shown a C++ application, now we showed this quite unusual map site where the maps would move, and they were big, and they were also quite a lot pretty. I remember we had done work in graphics design when we were students, and we knew how to make things pretty on a screen, which really matters for maps, not just aesthetically, but you could read the names of the streets, which is useful. And so we said, hey, so Larry wanted to see if we could do this in a browser, and so we cooked up this thing in a couple of weeks. I don't know if this was what you were thinking.
Of course, just in between.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Good.
and I think
confidence.
we impressed the Google people. We impressed ourselves too, to be honest. And this, when I say, you said fate, and I said yes, that looks a lot like luck. If we hadn't happened to have done all of this stuff with that embedded web browser and I would never have even known that you could do this sort of stuff. And actually, you know the term Ajax? So if you trace that back, that was coined by a gentleman, Jesse James, like the gunslinger, Jesse James.
Yeah.
He wrote a very brilliant paper, I thought, coining the term Ajax.
Yeah.
And the whole paper was about Google Maps and Google Suggest. That Google had also just launched this thing where when you were typing in a search box, it would show you suggestions for what you might want to search with. Also an unusually dynamic experience for the web in 2002 and 3. And Ajax really came out of the work they did and the work that we did in those 3 weeks.
Amazing.
Of mad, I call it heightened motivation, completely out of options, having just met the biggest star in Silicon Valley and completely broke. Three very motivating things. And so then they bought us, and you know, it was, I don't want to share numbers, but it was a very small acquisition. Like the numbers are very small.
So you didn't really become rich from that.
I mean, compared to what we were before,
it was better.
we could barely pay our rent before. And so it was, you know, a life-changing financial event. But it's nothing like what you hear, you know, billion for MapQuest, $1 billion for Waze many years later, right? And actually internally at Google, our little acquisition became known as by far the biggest return of investment of any acquisition Google ever did.
I was just thinking, you know, so on the 8th of February, it's now exactly 20 years.
Yes.
Since
the
Google
launch.
Maps was actually launched.
Yes.
And the impact since then is just impressive. I mean, I collected some numbers. So they report that they have 500 million users who are regularly uploading reviews and photos to the service. Yeah. And in general, around 100 million updates happen every day.
That's crazy.
There are 250 countries and regions which have been mapped, and this is still not the entire world, so there is still actually no room to grow. And only last year, they gave directions for trillions of kilometers. How do you feel about being part of such an impactful story? I mean, okay, the financials is something that you put on the side, and I think this is completely secondary. But you know, to know, you know, how the whole thing started now that 500 million users are using it. I mean, this is insane.
Yes, yes.
And there are generations which are coming out now who cannot imagine the world without Google Maps.
Yes.
At the same time, there are Gen Zs who have no sense of spatial orientation in the city because of you guys. I remember a while ago I was reading a story that since there is Google Maps and people on the North Pole, Inuits are actually using it, they have 50% more cases of incidents because they're losing the intuition of where they are. And it's very difficult in the snow.
Yes.
So you're literally changing the way that we operate in the world, with its upsides and also its downsides. Sorry for pointing also the negatives.
Look, it's true. I mean, this calculators is a good example of this, right? So like after we all got calculators, we got worse at adding and subtracting and multiplying.
That's why I'm grateful I was a waitress at some point. Got me trained.
And honestly, it's the same with my handwriting has dramatically deteriorated since the iPhone came out, right? But my thumbs are stronger.
Yes, reaction time.
And
is
so,
great.
technology does that.
Yeah.
And I think I'm obviously biased here since I work in technology, but I think progress has this thing that old skills become irrelevant and then they die out, for better or worse.
Yeah.
Jokingly, I'm fine with everyone having no sense of direction because I never had one. And that's why I made Google Maps. Or actually, I shouldn't say that. It was my brother's idea. But I think one of the reasons it's been so successful, like I think on a monthly basis, billions of people use it.
Yeah.
At Google, I don't know if they publish these numbers, but when I last heard, it was already approaching 2 billion monthly actives. And I don't have a sense of direction. you know how some people are dyslexic, and although they can be perfectly intelligent, they're just not very good at spelling, right? And I'm a little envious of dyslexics because they have this fancy Latin term for their condition, and there is no Latin term for people who get lost in their own apartment. And I just don't have that sense. Like if I'm walking on the street or going to a shop, when I come out, it's exactly 50% likely I will go back where I came from, even if I meant to continue in the same direction. Like it's just not there. And that means that when you make, so I like to make products where I'm the first user, and my brother is the same, right? So we were our own first target users.
Okay.
I'm not sure how conscious we were about that back then. We were just trying to make something better. And of course we made it better for ourselves. And because of this lack of sense of direction, that meant the very basic stuff. Where am I going? How am I going to get there? Had to work super well so that we don't get lost ourselves. And that, I think, then resonated really well with the mass market. And now we should all become this geographic, this whatever it should be called.
Let me ask you something else as well. Now that I'm listening to you, I can see the traits of a true entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, I talk to a lot of VCs, I talk to founders also here in the podcast. So I'm kind of like already developing an image of what are the ingredients for a successful entrepreneur. And I'm very interested in the topic. Now, how can a person like you do well in tech giants like Google and then later on Facebook? How did you feel well? Or how did you combine actually the mindsets? Because for entrepreneurs, quite often they go into entrepreneurship because they don't want to be part of a corporation. They don't have an alternative. They have an authority problem, or they don't like the politics of it. And for them, the only way to go is I'm going to build something on my own.
Yes. No, this is a super good question. And this was part of what we talked to Ram about when he was advocating you should go sell to Google. And one of the things he said was, you will be surprised with how startup-y 2,000 person at Google feels. And we were like, sure, you were saying that because you're on the board and you want them to. But he also said, look, you don't have negotiating power right now. You have no option. This is your only choice. You will make more money probably than you have, but it won't be that much. But you will meet some of the best people in the Valley. You will probably have a big success building maps for Google, which turned out to be true. Yeah. And then you can negotiate whatever you want. Or at least you'll be in a much better position. Next time you go out and do something, you'll be in a much better position. And so what happened, which is kind of funny, we did the deal, which took a while because this was also right when Google was going public. And so Megan and her legal team were sort of busy with the whole going public thing. But we did execute this. Actually, before we sold the company, we all showed up just as employees, all 4 of us, right? And then we sat, it was before I moved back to Australia, but we sat in this cubicle at the Googleplex, and no one paid attention to us. And we were like, have they forgotten us? Did they forget they bought us? Like, no one came and said hi.
No one is giving assignments.
And so we started playing these. The one thing we found the best Danish baker. So, I'm Danish, and there's this one Danish baker that made really authentic Danish pastry in the Valley. And we'd have this Danish day where we would go buy a big sheet of Danish pastry and we'd put it in our cubicle and we'd try and get everyone over to sample authentic Danish, and then we'll show them demos of our mass prototype. And we perfected that art. And then we made friends with the secretary or the EA of the biggest VP of engineering at the time, Alan Eustace. Yeah, he's a fun guy. He also, made the world record of jumping out of the balloon with a parachute. He was the top of the engineering. Okay. And so we tried to get his EA to get him hooked on this idea, so he'd come down and pay attention to us. And he sent us this note saying, number 1, I'm on a diet. So this is not working. Number 2, we bought you because we think you know what you're doing. So just keep doing what you were doing. It's not that we've forgotten, it's just that we think you will do the right thing. And so then we're like, okay.
so they left you be a startup
They just let us be a startup, right? And he actually wrote, when you need servers, this is the email, right? And because before we had no money, we couldn't even buy the data to make the maps before Google bought us. We'd actually like borrowed a square mile of maps data from one of the big car nav companies to even write our software. And so then I remember when we first wanted to launch, and we were like, we asked for 500 servers, and we thought this was like a gigantic number. And that department wrote back saying, why are you bothering us with such tiny trifles, fine, whatever. And actually, I should say, I mentioned Brett Taylor, who was this young but brilliant PM from the local search team, right? So he was our big advocate after that second demo. He was the advocate for Google buying us, and once they did, he actually joined our team, became a PM. He brought in his friend Jim Norris, an ace back-end programmer, and so now we were 6, and that was kind of the team that launched the whole thing. And Brett, I can't praise him enough. He left Google, did a startup, sold it to Facebook, became Facebook's CTO, recruited me to Facebook, then left, did another startup, sold to Salesforce, became the CEO of Salesforce along with Mark Benioff.
Yes.
And then now he's left again, and he's now running, I think, a $5 billion AI startup called Sierra. And along the way, he also was the chairman of Twitter's board when Musk bought it, and now he's the chair of OpenAI's board after that whole kerfuffle with Sam. So he's my best example of how right Ron was when he said, you will meet some of the best people in the Valley. And even on that original team, and you told the story, or had me tell the story of us rewriting the front end from C++ to JavaScript, right? Yeah. And then when we came in with this prototype that we were kind of proud of, Brett took a look at it and he's like, that's amazing. But it wasn't like exactly production level code we had in those
2 weeks.
And so he went, and this is a kind of a legendary story and entirely true. He's a PM, right? He's not a programming. He is. All the PMs at Google have programming degrees, but he rewrote the entire front end in a weekend to take it from my prototyping, chewing gum, safety pin thing to being launchable production code. And Brett's just different level.
Well, he was obviously also a big fan. Yeah, otherwise he wouldn't have done the story.
He joined and it's great. It's amazing.
I'm going to do a fast forward.
Yes.
Now, entrepreneurship. And how do you recognize good entrepreneurs? You were one of the early stage investors in Canva.
Yes.
Yeah. Obviously, it is connected to your passion also for graphics.
Yes, very much.
But you invested in Mel and her husband? Cliff.
Yeah.
Isn't that a no-go normally?
No,
I'm sorry.
not at all. No,
because I think a lot of VCs will raising...
do this, but I think... I don't have the statistics, but we pattern match, right? And if you're a VC and you've invested in a romantic couple and they have a romantic breakup and it destroys the startup, you might conclude, I'm never doing that again, right? Yes. But I think you can equally well play to the strength of things. Exactly. Where, because they're also romantically inclined, that actually strengthens things, and they're much better at shifting in and out of family, and there is no separate spouse telling them not to work so hard because they're in the same boat. And maybe because I worked with my brother, and there are tensions that come out of that, but there's also delight and amazingness, and maybe even a lack of this sort of polite veneer that we have with people that actually might bring out creativity better. And so this was never an issue for me that they were. So they were boyfriend, girlfriend back then. But also, I should say, one of the key things is that I had very complementary skills, right? She was a graphics designer. She was the one with the product vision. Yeah. And he's like the operator. He had business sense. He knows numbers. He knows money. And from day one, and he still says this publicly, whenever someone asks, right? She's the boss. I work for her. She can fire me if she wants to. That's how it works.
I love that.
Right. And I think they're, a powerhouse of a couple. They were not married back then. They were boyfriend, girlfriend. And in fact...
Even riskier, but in any case...
Oh, I don't know.
What is it that you saw in them?
Yeah. It's a really good question.
Tell me about the sparkle in the eyes. How do you recognize that? Because,
look... At
this stage, it's definitely a bet. In the person.
Yeah, and famously, 100, 200 VCs turned them down. Yeah. And then a group of kite surfing techies led by Bill Tai. He built his informal network. Which we host him here.
Mai Tai. No,
it was Mai Tai, now it's Act Tai.
Yeah, exactly.
We do these cool networking events on kite beaches where we bring together entrepreneurs, investors, artists, activists, and kite surfers, like professional kite surfers. And we do these networking events. And that's actually how I met, not at an event, but through this network. Okay. That's how I met Mel. And what happened was this, that Bill was kiting in Perth, where Mel and Cliff was from. And he did a little thing at the Curtin University there in Perth. Okay. And Mel and Cliff rocked up. There's an adorable photograph where they're wearing suits that appears to be borrowed because they weren't quite fitting. And they're pitching Bill, who's in board shorts, because he just come from the kite beach. And,
so absurd.
And then they pitched him this thing.
Yeah.
And maybe there was a competition, I forget. But they pitched him this thing and something. So Bill is very good at seeing the rough diamonds. Like he was the one who's like, there's something here. And he wrote to me, because I lived in Australia back then. He didn't. He lived in California. He was just in Australia kiting. And he's like, Lars, these guys have something. I don't know what it is, but you got to meet Mel. And then I met Mel actually in California because I was interviewing with Facebook at the time. I was kind of exiting Google. Yeah. So we met in California, but she was trying to raise money in Silicon Valley. And at some point early on in this, Bill wrote me this email. I still have it, super short. It says, if Lars finds you a tech team that he approves, I will invest. He wrote to both me and Mel. And it wasn't like, I'll invest. It was like, if Lars, because she's a graphics designer, he's a business student, and they didn't have a tech team. They had actually built a smaller tech thing, also graphics design, but specifically for yearbooks only. And they had done this with an outsourced tech team. I forget which country, but the software was just not very good. The vision was good. It was a good learning exercise for them about what sort of user interface you can build for non-professional designers. But the software was just like not very good. Yeah. And Bill was like, you need an in-house, because Mel's ambitions were unlimited, right? And if you're going to build something like that, you need an in-house tech team that's world-class. And so Bill wrote this to me. And because everyone else turned her down, she had every incentive to hound Lars down. and so
well, a lot was depending on you.
for the next year and a half, like I got to see the tenacity that Mel works with, the complete unwillingness to give up. Because what happened was, we met, I liked the vision, I'm into graphics, I'm not myself at all a designer, but I programmed stuff in that space. And so I like the space, but I also know how difficult it is to use the software. And so here was Melanie saying, I can make it easier and democratize. And so it was a compelling vision. And the first thing I did was I had just left Google. I don't know if you followed the Google Wave thing, but that had just like collapsed in a smoking heap of, speaking of the ups and downs. And, but there was some like incredible, that's probably the strongest team ever assembled, like at the beginning of anything. Like there was 60 engineers at Google in Australia, the best of the best. Okay. And I just left, and some of those guys had left too, and I introduced Mel to 4 or 5 of them of the best that I thought was the most appropriate also for a graphics design effort. You need a certain sense of aesthetics, but they were all,
not
busy.
Yes.
Not the stereotype, but yes. and so nothing came out of this. And then Mel started bringing me candidates. She'd go to networking events, she'd hang out with geeks, she'd like tirelessly try to find that magic CTO person to start a world-class tech team. And I took the time, I interviewed all of them. And I said, look, with your level of ambition, if you want to get started quick, sure. But if you want to do that big, I'm going to build the biggest. I remember having this conversation. I said, I'm going to build the biggest company in the world, and then I'm going to give all the money away. She even back then said this.
Really?
And I said, you mean the biggest design company in the world? And she said, no. I'm going to build the biggest company in the world. I'm going to give all the money away. And so I said, look, if you have that level of ambition for real, this is not your person. This person will not lead a tech team that can pull that level of ambition off. And so this went on for a year. And when she tells the story, you can sense how close she was to strangling me, because I was a no guy. I kept saying no. And then we had a break, when one of the original guys I'd introduced Mel to had left Google. He was actually a UI designer from the Wave team. Brilliant, like brilliant. We had one UI designer for 50 engineers, and he was always ahead of them. Like he could keep 50 engineers busy. And he was also himself a very accomplished programmer. And so I knew this was like the best choice for an effort like Mel's. But when I introduced him, he had started his own startup. And that's a tough pitch. Hey, leave your own startup and go join this thing that's just a slide deck. But so separately, Bill and I tried to help Cameron Adams, right, to make a startup, but it didn't quite work out. His startup, he never raised money. I think also because he and his co-founders maybe didn't get along, so I don't know. But the effort failed. And the minute he disbanded that, he called Mel. And he was like, so hey, tell me about that thing again. And really quickly they negotiated not just to hire him, but to make him the third co-founder. And he's now their CPO. Mm-hmm. And then once Cameron joined, the other guys from Google I had introduced him to were like, oh, Cameron's in. I'm into. So Dave Herndon, who's one of the most brilliant individual contributor, PhD out of Queensland in Australia, and also not to stereotype, right, but with an incredible sense of aesthetics and music too. He's a very good musician. So I thought this was the right complement, the user interface designer who can program and the crazy smart programmer with a strong set. So this was the perfect two first people. And Dave said, okay, with Cameron in, I'm in. And then he went to Google. He still worked at Google in Australia. And he said, I'm going to join this startup that Lars is helping. And Google said, please don't. And so they 5x'd his salary overnight, both the cash and the stock. And he was already very well paid, 5x'd overnight to get him to stay. And he called me up and he said, I can't do this. He was very sad. He's like, I can't say no to all this money. It's too much money. I can't do it. And I said, oh, well, let's find someone else. And Melanie said, hell no. She said, hell no, this will not happen. And so she wrote, she's published this, I'm not telling you anything private. She wrote a 20-page sort of graphical novel slide deck about Dave. It's hilarious. It's like, here's Dave with wanderlust and he wants to change the world, but Google wouldn't let him. And then Lars said, and then Google said, and then they gave him handcuffs.
Wow.
And then it's a brilliant. And in the end, there's the entire Canva team, all three of them, standing in his cutest photo with a little sign, hand-drawn sign saying, save Dave. And she sent him this thing. And then he changed his mind again. He came. And now he's a CTO of Canva.
It's amazing how a vision can actually bring such amazing people together.
But to answer your question, what did I see in them, right? So there was a compelling vision, a problem space I liked, but the tenacity, and the work ethic. So we spent a bunch of time on these kite events, which is kind of party, playful atmosphere. And Mel and Cliff happened to be a young, super good-looking couple. And when we were partying on the beach, they were in their room working every night. It was just I hope they've found a bit more balance. I think they have, but their work ethic, unbelievable. And their personal motivation is quite crazy.
And it's been impressed the platform developed as a user. I have been always.
She's going to speak, by the way, Mel, when we do our festival.
I want to come back to that. I want to come back to that because I know that you're in a hurry. You need to speak at the conference downstairs. Coming back to working with, working as a couple.
Yes.
You have the next gig coming up in May.
I do.
Here in Athens.
I do.
You're, I think, for a couple of years now, officially part of the Greek ecosystem.
Yes.
And I'm very grateful that you are part of this ecosystem, that you are now part of our Central and Eastern European ecosystem. Tell me more about the event and the festival.
Yes. So look, I came here 4 years ago, as you know, married to a Greek goddess.
Yes.
And after we lived in London, we lived in New York.
She's amazing. I got to meet her as well.
And we do all our investing together, by the way. It's very much, speaking of married couples working together. obviously. And she fires me on a regular basis.
Okay.
She takes me back.
Okay.
But so we came here 4 years ago. And I have to be perfectly honest here. My expectations of the Greek startup ecosystem was quite low because in 2012, when our older daughter graduated from high school, I was between projects. We came here very deliberately to Athens to see, should this be our home? I gave a talk at TEDx. Ella wrote the script. It's the best talk I've ever given.
Yes.
And we toured the ecosystem. And that was a very short tour. Dude, like this was at the depth of the financial crisis that hit Greece really hard. I mean, lost 25% of the GDP overnight. It was quite terrible. And I try to make the point in my speech that crises like that is actually a good time to start a startup, because that was my experience. Remember, Google Maps started when the bubble burst.
Yeah.
But what we found was, and I can't blame people for this, I found people were so depressed, and young people in particular were more thinking how to get out.
The unemployment rate, especially for young people, was devastating.
Yes, it was crazy. I mean,
I remember
unemployment went to sky high, right? And so then we didn't come, also for some personal reasons. Our daughter ended up going to university in New York, and we had just had our little baby. We wanted to grow up together. So we moved to New York. And then pandemic happened. And then on a whim, one day, we're like, let's move to Greece. Because Greece handled the pandemic really well, which I can't say is true for America. And we came back on a whim. Only 8 years after, so in 2020, we came back. And it didn't even occur to me to ask the question, could a startup ecosystem of any meaningful size emerge in 8 years? Where most of those have been really deep in debt crisis. It didn't even occur to me. So I thought, we'll go there, it's calmer, the weather is nicer, we can kite surf, and we can manage our portfolio from paradise. That's how I thought of it. And then we came, and it was pandemic, so there was no events like this going on.
No.
But we would meet a startup in our backyard, masks separated, right? And we're like, oh, that's interesting. And then we started investing, and then we met more and more startups, and we started looking at, can this really, in 8 years, is it really possible? And then we saw that Greece, even 4 years ago, had a really impressive, I mean, it's young, right? And it's small compared to other cities of the same size, but the growth rate is incredible. And in fact, my favorite statistic about this is that a few years ago, when inflation hit the roof and interest rates suddenly grew and all investment dried up, almost like back in when the dot-com bubble burst, right? Most ecosystems in Europe took a 60 to 80% cut in the total amount of money invested across an ecosystem that first year of the interest rates gone down. But Greece grew faster than the macroeconomics went down.
Yes.
And this, I think, is crazy, right? And still, the absolute size is still modest. So there's maybe 700 to 1,000 startups. There's 15 or so active VCs. The first 2 or 3 unicorns are starting to emerge. But if you plot the growth rates, it's incredible. And one of the things we then do as angel investors, instead of just looking at individual startups, helping individual startups, we start looking at the ecosystem. What can we do to help the whole ecosystem, to keep that growth rate going? Okay. And we looked at Lisbon, of course. We looked at Helsinki. We looked at small ecosystems that seem to have built outsourced size compared to where they were. And we found consistently international tech festivals in emerging ecosystems can have a profound impact on the local scene and also be amazing for the world. You know, Lisbon has the biggest tech festival in Europe, Web Summit, 75,000. Helsinki has, in my opinion, the best, smaller, but so amazing. You know,
I cannot talk here. We're working with both of them.
Slush is amazing. We can say that, right?
Yes,
but they get
Slush is great.
They get 25,000 people to travel to Helsinki in the winter.
In the winter.
You know, it's slush.
In the slush.
I'm sure everyone knows that, right? Slush
it's not
means
even
you're
real snow. It's just wet and windy and horrible and dark.
You know, the reason that it's so good, you know this, right? But the reason is that when they founded this, Peter Westerbacher, who's now a good friend, he's the guy who made Angry Birds, right? So he was one of the founders, and they decided, let's have a nonprofit organization staffed entirely by students and new grads build this thing. And that's why it's so amazing. Youthful, fresh. It's like a party all day long. It's great.
I love the aesthetics of it, by the way, as well.
Aesthetics are great. It's like you're in a nightclub.
Yeah.
And so look, so we started thinking about this. And we tried actually first to do a bit what Lisbon did, which was to get the government to buy an existing festival from some other country and move it to a nicer, warmer environment. That failed.
Yes. That was the
So
the Austin
we
guys.
have all signed NDAs. So. but we tried.
But to be honest, Athens would have been such a better location for that. I mean,
I agree.
Come on, really.
I agree. But look.
But anyway,
So, another failure that's going to turn into a great success because it hurt when.
I see a pattern in your story.
Yes. Yeah, no, but one of my favorite subjects is the role of failure in creating success is an important thing to try and understand. But so when that failed, I went and I had a conversation with one of the world's greatest classical scholars called ChatGPT. I think you know her.
I know
so
her.
Smart, that one. And you know how the
although mine is a guy. Anyway.
That's funny, my wife's too. Anyway, the Olympic Games, modern Olympic Games, biggest sporting festival in the world, is a modern version of the most popular ancient Greek sporting festival. So I asked Chatty, I call her Chatty, hey, about the Olympics, was there another popular festival in the ancient calendar that we could modernize into a huge international festival of innovation, ideally across both tech and culture? And Chatty was like, oh my God, Lars, what a great idea. She's so nice. And
always affirming you.
And she said, you must be thinking about Panathēnea. And I never heard of Panathēnea, I have to admit. But it turns out Panathēnea, so the Olympic Games every 4 years back then. And in between was Panathēnea, just as popular. But where the Olympic Games was about sport, Panathēnea, which was right here in Athens, people came from all over the Greek world, which was huge back then. And they competed for 12 days in craftsmanship, in engineering, but also in poetry and music and theater. And they did boat races and chariot races and sports. And this huge festival. Competition was at the core of it, but competition specifically for the purpose of raising everyone, of improving the future, if that makes sense.
That's my weak spot, for instance.
Which?
Brands that actually tell a story. Really.
This brand,
love it.
this brand has a good story. And the best part,
story.
well, I don't know if it's the best part, but a really good part was the occasion of this was the birthday of the goddess, the patron goddess of Athens, whose temple we are looking at here. So in English, Pallas Athena, in Greek, Athena, she's the warrior goddess of wisdom and creativity from back then.
The Council of Ulysses?
Yes, that too. But it was her birthday. So after 12 days of these amazing competitions where they discovered all the new crafts and the new engineering and the new art too, like the new theater, the new music, right? And then the best warships, they discovered this through competition, and they had a delightful celebration of her birthday, where on the day before, all the young people of Athens went on top of the Acropolis and danced all night. And then on the birthday itself, they did, here from Keramikos, they did a big procession through town. Ended up
from here. That's far, actually. Okay,
I mean, they had the whole day, right? And so they ended up on top of the Acropolis, where the young people were exhausted from dancing, and then they met up there and had a huge feast. And this party, it was such a big deal back then that it's actually depicted on the temple. That frieze on the inside has a whole section showing the birthday party of the goddess whose temple it is. It was that big a deal back in the day.
So you're going to have a party as well, right?
As a matter of fact, we are.
Oh, yes. That's how you bring people here.
Yes, Athena's birthday. Athena's birthday.
And when is the birthday officially, like in the history?
Well, so historically it was in the middle of the summer. That's not super practical now in these days of global warming. So in the ancient day there was really a summer festival. Yeah. But we have decided, my young team has decided, when I say my young team, it's not my team. So it's a core part of the Finnish model that we're not just hiring young people for, cheap labor, but they're really in charge. Like the CEO of this company, the Panathēnea company, it's a nonprofit, he's graduated 2 months ago, right? And the head of BizDev, the head of marketing, the head of experience, the head of the operations, they're all either still students or new grads, and they really call the shots. People like me, and we have like a group of maybe 25 old-timers, some Greek, some foreign, you should consider joining, that are mentoring the young team, right? So we mentor them with the experience we have. We open up our connection, of course, our pocketbooks.
I was just thinking, that you probably have amazing names in your Rolodex, so I'm expecting great speakers at the event.
Melanie is one of our headliners, right? So,
amazing. Okay.
So she will probably have to do it in one of the new holographic video conferencing things because it is a long flight from Australia to here. But one of the key themes that the team wants, and I completely agree, is how we call it how to change the world from your hometown. So we want to hear stories from people like Melanie, founders who created worldwide success without first moving to Silicon Valley, right? So this, I think, is a subject. It's obviously relevant to Athens, it's relevant to Bulgaria, to Rome, but it's relevant to Europe, really, and everywhere else in the world, right?
Just a couple of days ago, I was actually listening to Mark Andreessen, talking about the fact that the Silicon Valley cannot, it won't help anyone if they brain drain the region.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah? So we need to make it somehow possible for young, ambitious, tenacious innovators to build their success story from wherever they are.
Exactly.
I don't agree anymore with this, requirement that if you want to fundraise in the valley, you have to be there.
Right.
Wow, it doesn't make sense anymore.
But
anyway,
plus these started, right? So Mel started 12, 15 years ago, and she's now the biggest player in her space worldwide. And she built it all in Australia. She did move from Perth to Sydney, but she had the choice. She could have moved to Silicon Valley if she wanted to. She raised a lot of her money there, but she didn't move there. And so there's a company in Finland called ISAI. You might not have heard about them because it's not a consumer thing. They make satellites, low Earth orbit satellites that take pictures better than any other satellites. And they are truly a world leader in their space. They have more than 100 satellites like this flying around, and it was built in Helsinki. And one of their founders is hopefully going to come speak. We haven't quite closed the deal. He has a very busy calendar, right? But we're hoping people like this will come speak. I think the Spotify founders would have been great for this, but they have other commitments. They cannot make it.
Okay.
Hopefully, maybe that we can ask them to sponsor the party.
So anyone who wants to help with interesting speakers can pitch to you?
Yes.
Okay.
You can write to me, lars@panathēnea.org, or info if you prefer writing.
Which
to
are the
whole
dates?
Team. So the dates of the inaugural event is 7 to 9 of May. So in a little bit less than 3 months. And look, the long-term ambition that the team has are huge. Like we want to build something. Do you know South by in Texas?
Of course.
Right, so the biggest festival in the world. 500,000 people come there. And that's the sort of thing we want to build for Europe here in Athens. Maybe not 500,000, maybe only 250,000. Not next year, but in the next 5 years or so, where it's a big umbrella festival, where there'll be a big tech conference here, probably the biggest in Europe, or one of the biggest in Europe, but there'll also be a music festival. There'll be a film festival. There might be a food thing, a wellness thing, philosophy.
I should link you to my Burning Man guys.
Yes, Burning Man, definitely. Panathēnea is where we'll do a little Burning Man exhibition.
We had this ambition actually to create a sort of a satellite event here, somewhere in the region. So it is a good, way to,
Yeah, so we are thinking that Panathēnea will become this super welcoming thing where people who are already doing things or even just have ideas can come and make a deal with the team. So what's important is that the ethos is aligned. The purpose here is we come together and we may talk, we may compete, but the purpose is to improve the future. Yeah. And the focus is on the founders and creators that are going to make that happen. That's the ethos, right? And then we like the nonprofit thing. That's how we operate, but it's...
One last thing, because you have to go to your panel discussion here at the conference, to those who are still skeptic about Central and Eastern Europe and this part of the world and how much potential is here for innovation.
Yes.
What are you going to tell them?
Come for the party, and then you will be pleasantly surprised that there's more. I am trying to recreate my own experience and coming here on a whim and thinking, crises and then seeing the energy here. And a lot of it comes from the youth here, of course, right? And I was really surprised with how much is going on here. And you don't have, like, we're trying to build a festival here that's not come hear about Greek startups. It's a festival that is, let's come together, revive this ancient brand, really, where the whole world came together and have competition, and the best discussions is how they invented the future. Let's do that again. And we're taking advantage of Greece's incredible strength in hospitality. Like, Greece is probably the strongest in Europe. And it's not just that the industry can easily host 250,000 people here in Athens in the span of 10 days. Like, we have that capacity and those skills, but I think it's also deeply ingrained, not just in Greece, but the entire region, right? The hospitality is so deeply ingrained in the DNA of every human here. And so we're offering Greece, I say we, I'm a wannabe Greek, we're offering to host this ancient idea in the modern fashion for the whole world here in Greece. And you'll come, and as it grows, more and more interesting people will come, and more interesting conversations are going to be had here. And then when you're here, my expectation is that you will probably have the same pleasant surprise that I did, that in this corner of the world, really cool things are happening. So, like, of my 100 portfolio companies that I have assembled over 10 years, 10 of them are Greek, and some really cool ones. You know, like the professor Ioanna, who is building with her young team a 3D printer that prints with human tissue. And they're soon going to be the first that can create a new bladder. When we have bladder cancer, you don't have to have that bag sitting on the toilet. I mean, amazing stuff is happening here. A biotech company.
If there is a place where you can get the divine blessing for self-fulfilling prophecy, it is here. So I'm fairly optimistic that over the years, this could be definitely, and this will be actually a hotspot for meaningful discussions, for meaningful connections, for also new innovations to be born, to be inspired. You know, at the Recursive, we have this claim, which is a recursive statement, stories shape stories. And this is how you do it. I mean, this is how self-fulfilling prophecies are actually happening. One last thing before you go. You just came back from Paris.
Yes.
AI. What's your take on what is coming at us? Are you rather optimistic? Are you rather pessimistic, especially now that you've seen the discussions happening between the techies and also the government officials? And I think if we want to do it right, we need to play together.
Yes.
What is your sense from today's perspective?
Look, I'm super optimistic about our future. And what has happened in AI in the past 2 years blows my mind. Like, even if you'd asked me a year before ChatGPT launched, if you'd asked Lars, how far is AI from being able to really understand natural language? I would have said a decade at least. Like, I really didn't see this coming. And it's because it's you know, AI has been researched deeply for 50 years. You know the saying that it takes 50 years to create an overnight success. And I'd heard so many times, I don't work myself directly in AI, but heard so many times from enthusiastic, super smart people, we just need more data, we just need more compute, we just need more better algorithms, and then it'll get to that point, right? And then over and over and over, for my 3 decades in tech, I'd seen it not work. And suddenly it worked. and I liken it to, you know, you put you put water in a pot on a stove, and you keep adding heat to it, and it doesn't boil until suddenly it boils. And that's what happened. And you can see, I mean, I have my sense that this is by far the most impactful breakthrough in technology, certainly in my lifetime. It's breathtaking that computers have reached a scale where they can, first of all, read and write better than most humans, but possibly soon also reason better than we can. Obviously, they have 10 orders of magnitude more knowledge than a human can possibly hold inside them. This we have already done with Google, right? But if you put that together with natural language and reasoning, it's a really interesting future.
It's a similar trend that we are probably going to see, just like we don't need to remember the directions and the places, you know, as we, because we started with Google Maps, now we don't need to hold space for this kind of information, but actually focus on smart decision making. Let's see.
Well, look, I'll tell you this. So to your question, I'm an optimist or a pessimist. So I have always been in technology. I'm always of the opinion that progress is good for the world. But this thing here has struck a nerve in a lot of people that's unusual. It's not new, the idea that we're building machines or computers that can do work, that used to have to be done by humans, right?
Yeah.
And so, and that can be very disruptive. If you happen to be a worker in that space, can be very disruptive. Like the new thing is the scale of it,
Yeah.
but also possibly just that the jobs that will be disrupted are white-collar jobs now. And those are more the people that tend to take part in public debate. And that I think is probably more what causes the, this fear almost. Now,
Yeah.
I'll tell you. So I was just in Paris, and I felt the energy there. Tens of billions of dollars being poured into investments, which is great. And I was at Station F, just huge startup hub, which is another thing that some people are working on here that I'm super excited about, by the way.
Yes.
And it was just like packed. The energy was just breathtaking, and all the Macron was there. And I missed the Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis was there the day before. Everyone was there, and it was great. And but then I also was in Dubai, where they at the same time had the World Government Summit, which is also all about AI, of course. And I got invited to this. Sometimes there's these small gatherings where they kind of take the speakers and you get to hang out just with the speakers. And I got invited to this thing in the desert, of course, riding camels. Mm-hmm. I joke, I thought you wanted me on a panel, but you meant camel. And so we were out there, and there was a gentleman, Chatham rules. So I won't say who it was, but he's like a very prominent investor in this space, and he's put tons of money into several of the big AI labs. Mm-hmm. And he made this kind of this sentence. He said, "Look, they tell me, the top researchers in the top labs tell me that in 1 to 3 years, knowledge workers will no longer add value to the world. There's nothing a knowledge worker like me can do that can't be done by AI 3 years out." the whole room went like this. And the discussions afterwards were mostly about whether this was true or not. Are we actually close to that level of reasoning? And Jan LeCun, he wasn't in the desert, but he spoke in Paris. Mm-hmm. And he is of a very different opinion.
Yes.
He's like, look, we can't even match a cat's intelligence right now. And we need a whole different, like LLMs are amazing, but we need, he calls it a world model.
Yes.
He thinks there is a future where this can happen, but we're not that close. Now, whether we're close or not close, I have this question, which is, let's say we built, and probably we will, we build a machine that just beats human intellect on all aspects. It's better reasoning, it's better at speaking, it knows everything.
How are we going to add value?
Well, but so that's my question. Does that make you and me obsolete, or does it make us superhuman?
I believe that the future will belong much more to the artists, to the creators, to those who are relying on their intuition.
Right.
That thing that we still cannot crack when it
Yes.
comes to neural networks. I'm sorry, I think the more we actually work to copy the human mind, the more we actually understand how it works,
Yes.
and the things that we won't be able to copy.
Yes.
So I'm actually excited about the future because
I am too.
maybe I'm also a woman and I rely on this superpower of mine, which is the intuition, which is
Yes.
this a bit maybe abstract, maybe esoteric way of thinking. And I think this is going to be much more important in the future.
I completely agree. And I'll tell you, I'll phrase it maybe slightly differently, but I think we mean the same thing, that these machines we're building now, they do crystallize this question of what makes life different from machines, right?
Yes.
It's no longer natural language. Soon, certainly it's not knowledge, right? Google has known more than any human for a long time, right? It's certainly not crunching numbers. It's not finding your way on streets, right? The computer's better, but if computers are better at all of the intellectual endeavors, all of the reasoning, thinking, knowledge things that we do, then what makes us different? And I think the answer is consciousness, which I think is what you were saying too.
Which is a very broad topic, and I'm super pissed that we're getting exactly to that question now because I need to kick you out. But I would suggest let's continue the conversation maybe in another form.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think
Panathēnea,
we need to have because that's an important one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Panathēnea, is going to have a philosophy of mind section.
I'll be there. I'll be there.
Panathēnea.
Probably till the early morning.
Yes,
And I'm
yes.
looking forward to meeting the people that you will invite. Lars, thank you so much. It's been so
Pleasure.
fun. There are so many questions that I didn't ask that I still want to ask. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation. Please let's do it
Yes.
as soon as
yes.
possible,
Yes.
because they are kind of like, philosophical questions that need some answering, and I'll be
Yes.
super curious to hear your thoughts on
Yes.
it.
Well, I have thoughts, as you can tell, because it's like,
Yes.
it's
yes.
really
And I've been
breathtaking
having them
what's
in
happening.
the past weeks. So I'm exactly where you are. It's the keyword is consciousness. We will continue here. I wish you all the best for the camel and the panel discussion.
Yeah, the camel and the panel,
Yes.
the panel and the camel, yes.
And if you're just as passionate about innovation as we are, hit subscribe for the Recursive podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. We're everywhere.